Welcome back. From sleds to beds, Northern Hardware has what you need. Since opening in 1919, the store has served Prince George from the gold rush to wartime. And as Harold Moffat used to say, if we don't have it, you don't need it. 7 days a week, Hilliard Clare is at his desk at Northern Hardware. The 84-year-old works in accounts, a far cry from his starting position in 1945.
I helped fill bottles of linseed oil, turpentine, coal oil.
At 16, he made 25 cents an hour, but Mr. Clare quickly moved up through the ranks, becoming a partner with the Moffat brothers by 1949.
Well, it just meant that I was a shareholder in the business, and it didn't change the work attitude or anything. We just worked all together to build a business.
When they weren't busy building a business, they would come here.
The snake room.
Now it's full of memorabilia, pictures, and awards, but decades ago, it was a place to unwind after work.
Well, these girls have done a fantastic job of fixing it up, and that.
The store has changed inventory throughout the years, but some things, like Champion, stay the same.
That was way back in the 50s, and it was 10 cents then. It's 10 cents now. That horse has galloped a lot of miles, I'll tell you.
The Northern had its challenges. It endured the Great Depression, a devastating fire, and the Second World War. But people stuck with the store. A.B. Moffat and then son Harold would become known for cashing checks and extending credit.
He would say to them, you know what, take what you need. When you get the money, just come. Well, you're good. Just take what you have to have. And people did. And there was lots of stories like that. How, the Northern, they just came in and we always looked after them and they always came back.
That service made lifelong customers, keeping the store in business for 95 years. Its birthday is next month.
95 years is pretty special. And and so much has happened over those years. And being a family business, it's amazing. All the way back from A.B. Moffat up to now Ted's daughter, Kelly.
It's a happy coincidence that the store's celebration falls on Mr. Clare's 85th birthday.
It's been a pleasure to come to work every day, I guess, and work with the people that we've had the good fortune to have working for us or with us. Sort of developed a slogan around the community that if we don't have it, you don't need it.
The downtown is dotted with little pieces of history. It's all about knowing what to look for. Take the old post office, for instance. It sits like it has on 3rd Avenue for decades, pretty well unchanged, except for the fact that mail hasn't come through there in years. Recognize this corner? How about now? This old building on the corner of 3rd and 5th Avenue used to be the city's post office. For Julie Creaser, it has an important story to tell, and she makes sure it is on the Prince George Library's downtown walking tour.
The walking tour covers a good chunk of the downtown area. The students start at the library, and the goal is to connect the informational local history resources in the library to the actual physical spaces in the community.
Its Art Deco architecture gives it away as a building of the 30s.
This is the original 1939 post office building that the community of Prince George lobbied hard for, actually. They petitioned and fundraised, and they weren't going to get the post office building, but the federal government finally did say that they would, because the original post office had actually been in the Fort George area. So those were two separate communities.
Since 1939, the building has had many lives. First, a post office, then a transmitter building for CBC before its current role.
Well, now owned by the Intersect Family Services Society, and again, a good example of architecture, Art Deco style. It's well preserved in its present location on 3rd Avenue.
The building has stood the test of time in the downtown when so many others did not.
Being a brick building, we don't have as many brick buildings. So many of the buildings in Prince George in the early days were wood, of course, because wood was available and they went up very quickly. Unfortunately, many were lost to fire, though, so it is nice that we have some remaining.
The inside looks much different than it did decades ago, but its old radiators give away its age, as do the light standards outside and, of course, its plaque.
one of the things that makes it one of the most interesting buildings on the tour, even though lots of the stories are really, really interesting, is that, again, it's one of those original buildings. It stands as it stood. It's one of the 4 protected heritage sites in the city of Prince George. So there aren't many buildings that are protected under our heritage bylaw, but this happens to be one of them. And so that means that over time, you're not going to see many alterations to this building. Down the road, people are still going to be able to enjoy this particular structure as it stands.
This old building proves the more things change, the more they stay the same. The old post office is one of only 4 protected heritage sites in the city. The South Fort George Schoolhouse is another. It was the first school built in what would become Prince George, and while it hasn't had a classroom of students in over 100 years, it still has plenty to teach. With a little jiggling and a good kick, the old South Fort George Schoolhouse opens. The desks are empty. And the bell for school hasn't rung in over 100 years. But for Bob Campbell and the Exploration Place, it's still a place of learning. Naturally, the first lesson is history.
Built by a Mr. Wiggins of the Northern Development Company in 1910 in South Fort George. So that's really when people started to move here. There was a few people in 1906, but people were starting to come to South Fort George in 1910.
The community of South Fort George rented the building from Mr. Wiggins for $30 a month and hoped for the best as their children smiled on the very first day of school.
Initially there were 28 kids, and they're pretty rowdy. They weren't used to school or any of these things. So, and they didn't have a qualified teacher. So the first teacher lasted a week, the second teacher lasted a month, and then they hired a Mrs. A.B. Campbell, and she used the cat of 9 tails and instilled some discipline, and I guess within a month they had a pretty good school.
The small school is likely made of spruce with a solid wood door. In the cold northern winters, students would have been practically frozen in their desks.
Well, you can see the pot-bellied stove here, and it's probably one of the students' duties, whoever's been bad maybe, I don't know, but they would have to keep it stoked up.
In 1976, the Weatherly family donated it to the museum. It won't likely be moving now that the Heritage Commission has made it a protected heritage site.
We also have a heritage register, which it's a list of properties recognized for their character and historical value. Some of those buildings include the South Fort George Schoolhouse.
For Bob Campbell, it's insurance that this little piece of history will be preserved.
It's part of our pride of who we are. It shows our roots, and that, we started small, but the city is growing and developing very rapidly.
From humble beginnings to big city dreams, this little schoolhouse still has much to teach. We've toured private homes and public buildings, but next we're going to take a trip to the path to the church at Shelley. It has its ghosts, but there's a push to give it new life. That story, when building our history, continues.